Welcome back, Farmers OutKick Studios. 1-888-FARMERS to switch to save a bundle on your auto insurance. Joined now by SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Appreciate you getting up early with us, and congratulations on getting through the college football season. Did you ever think you'd be able to hear that sentence delivered, and also that you'd only miss 2 games, Vanderbilt, Georgia, and I believe Ole Miss and Texas A&M is the entirety of the games that were scheduled. You guys didn't get played. It's quite an accomplishment.
Yeah, those are the 2, and I think we hoped, and we had a plan, because hope is not a plan, to get to the finish line, but going back to last March, you realize how much was really out of your control. So to get to the end, to have a conference championship, and to play 2/3 of the bowl games we had scheduled, and the national championship game, and have a team win the national championship game, I would define that as a successful season.
Not only a successful season, I mean, I think for college football to get played at all and crown a champion is a remarkable achievement. Now that you've had a little bit of time to sit back and think about what went down, when you look back all the way from March up to the game kicking off between Alabama and Ohio State, it's one of the most remarkable 8 or 9 month stretches in the history of football. Not only did you guys play almost an entirety of your schedule, but you did it with fans present. You did it without creating any major health conditions, I believe, for any players or coaches. Given the circumstances, it really could not have gone hardly any better than it did. I mean, I think that's probably fair to say, isn't it?
Yeah, from an evaluation standpoint, I took the position that you had to do people are going to do a 2-part evaluation. The first is when we made the decision, which was in late July, early August, a lot of pressure to not play, a lot of commentary about shouldn't play. And really what I said on August 10th, that was the Monday when everyone was stopping, was we were going to continue forward, work with our medical professionals, keep trying to learn, put plans in place. And if you think about success, I think we made the right decision based on the information available at that time, delayed our season, lengthened the time to begin. And then, Clay, I think one of the really remarkable things looking back was our first 3 weeks where we had no disruptions. And that didn't happen, I think, in any other sport. I think that's true, even as we're seeing what's happening in the NBA and the NHL right now. And then you fast forward to the second point of the judgment, which was going to be at the end of the season, looking back. And we had to stop because of positive COVID tests. Again, to my knowledge, we didn't have any spread, as you said, within the game. People were able to receive treatment. And you have to compare that to the alternative, which gets lost, which is you just stop and send everybody home. You go back to the summertime when we brought young people back on campus, we learned that they had either tested positive upon return or had the antibodies and had COVID at some point, but hadn't known, which is its own public health problem. So, we provided health care, we provided oversight, we provided testing, provided treatment, provided a lot of education. I'd argue there's no group of young people that's ever known any more about a virus than they know right now. And that allowed us to compete not only in football in the fall, but we named the soccer champion, cross-country champions, and played volleyball as well.
How close, for people out there who are listening, did college, as you just mentioned, not just college football, but fall sports on college campuses in general, come to not happening?
That's a hard one for me right now. If I sat here, so I'm doing the interview from home before I head to the office, and I'd sit on my front porch and trying to sort through things. And, there were moments. In fact, one of the more memorable moments for me was I called one of our university presidents, and it was kind of a tough time in late July where you just didn't have great clarity. And I said, look, I don't know if we can play. I said, I can't imagine the answer. In fact, I can't even figure out how to ask the question about not playing football. in the fall in the Southeastern Conference. And it was an admission of honesty that we were in a completely uncertain circumstance. And fast forward, one of the lessons I learned was actually from a podcast by a guy named Andy Stanley, that in times of uncertainty, to the extent you can provide clarity, that needs to be the focus. And I actually went from that in early August and tried to figure out, well, where can we communicate some level of clarity? Where can we say we're not delaying start, we're not delaying the start. We're setting a new start date. We've got a new format. Here's our finish line. And even when people pressured us to move the finish line, let's keep, we can adjust. Let's get all these games. And we said, no, here's the finish line. And I think those were really, really wise decisions in retrospect.
Were you surprised by the negativity from many media covering sports in general, but college football in particular, about the amount of people who were basically saying it's impossible to play? Did that surprise you? And how impactful was that in terms of providing a difficult launching point, because everybody's hearing that noise in the media of we can't do this, which had to filter through to some of the players, some of the parents, some of the coaches, and some of your school presidents and chancellors as well?
One of the harder parts. So was I surprised by that? No, because there's a bit of a dwelling on the negative side, and it's easy to say don't. I think we did the harder thing, which was to try and to admit, there are no guarantees. To have honest and candid conversations with student athletes, some of which ended up on a taped conversation published by the Washington Post. Those weren't easy. But if we were looking for the easy way out, we could have just stopped. And so I would suggest it was easy to just point the finger and say don't. It was harder to do things. And so you had to block that out, not be inattentive to criticisms. I think you have to use that to inform your thinking a bit. But just that was not going to be my deciding factors. I do think it influenced people. And so some of the questions we'd have asked of us were clearly generated from media. And if you go back to early August, we had a conversation with our full group of presidents and chancellors about the kind of public sentiment, like, could you play? Our athletics directors had that same conversation. What was really interesting is when the young people who comprise our teams finally stood up and said, we want to play, the whole sentiment changed. And that wasn't a creation by anyone in an administrative or coaching capacity. That was young people who are competitors saying, we want to compete. And we'd offered the opportunity to opt out. We did that in mid-July, but then a credit to young people for standing up and saying, I want the opportunity. Alante Taylor at Tennessee, I remember vividly on a call saying, I'll be swabbed every day. And we didn't even know what that meant at that time. He said, you can stick the swab up my nose every day if I get to play on Saturday. And to his credit, he did.
We're talking to Greg Sankey, commissioner of the SEC. Got the season in football and all the other fall sports completed. What do you feel right now about college basketball? How optimistic are you about that? Obviously, missing the NCAA tournament last year, a lot of people out there want to know. I know the NCAA came out with their schedule on when games would be played. And what are you hearing, thinking about college baseball and other sports out there as you continue in now the spring semester?
We learned a lot in the fall, again, playing soccer, volleyball, having cross-country meets, football, golf, tennis. We're, 2.5 months into swimming, which is operated without disruption. That's an indoor sport. Presumably chlorine must help somehow, but I say that with a smile on my face. We're not competing, body on body like you do posting up in basketball. Right. So there's a lot of activity that has taken place. Gymnastics is taking place right now. Every Friday night in the league. But we anticipated the likelihood of disruption in basketball. I was open to say we can't build enough room into our basketball schedule because we play twice a week to make up games like we did in football, where we had that space built in that got us to the 69 of 71 games. And so I think on the men's side, we're down a net 5 games scheduled, so we've moved some to play earlier. We've had to postpone some. We can keep moving forward. I do think when you bring people together for the NCAA tournament, that's going to be its own challenge. And what you learn, there's a New York Times article last Thursday, I think, about the mental strain of the NBA bubble and why they're not in a bubble again. The same with the NHL. So when you bring people together for a long period of time and kind of go into this lockdown mode, that's its own challenge beyond COVID. It's a mental strength. How do you compete? But I think we've shown we can play. It's the ability to continue and to do so in what I would define as a complete way. And that's where the question marks have to be acknowledged.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. Story that came out earlier this week about the University of Tennessee. They fired Jeremy Pruitt, a lot of other different employees of that football program in particular. They've had press conference. They're in the process of hiring a new AD and a new coach. What do you know about that? There are reports the NCAA has been involved. Has the Southeastern Conference been involved? What is your interaction or involvement in that story, if at all?
We're not investigators, and I think Chancellor Plowman communicated very well on Monday the nature or the source of information. I think that came directly to them. And then our institutions have a responsibility to inform the conference office, and we recommend the NCAA, as information is developed, you want to do that in any circumstances where there are a lot of questions. So I credit her leadership in this work and others on campus. And I don't know the details. I know the general set of circumstances. The reality is I saved my commentary on those for later because in an investigating situation, you don't know the final details, and it's appropriate to let those be developed. Obviously, an important decision made on that campus, one that is going to lead them into their next chapter, and I'll support her leadership as they move forward.
As a general rule, I know you've worked on the Committee on Infractions. Can you kind of explain to me when the NCAA, and to our audience, when the NCAA is involved early on in an investigation into alleged violation of rules, how is that looked upon compared to the NCAA not being involved as much and or sometimes being stonewalled, like we've seen, for instance, at Southern California over the years? How does that typically play out, not in this individual circumstance at Tennessee, because a lot of the facts are still out there, but in your experience as a Committee on Infractions member, the NCAA being involved versus the NCAA being kept at arm's length, what's the impact there?
Yeah, there's probably one of your long-form podcasts to explain that. In fact, there may be like 3 episodes because
Yes.
Every one of these circumstances is unique. A university has a responsibility to investigate, to self-evaluate. You hear about institutional control, and so digging into information is that institutional control responsibility. When I was on the committee, and I'm not now, I always thought it was important to see how did the institution react and act as it received information. The NCAA enforcement staff is charged with determining whether there's what they call exemplary cooperation. Every school is expected to cooperate. And where that doesn't happen, that is a negative for the school. So the fact that I'll just give praise, the fact that the university has gotten on top of this, has been diligent, as I understand, in digging into the information. As I watched the public release of information on Monday, it's clear they've taken this seriously, and the responsibility now for the NCAA, and I've written about this. In fact, Pat Forty got a hold of the letter. The NCAA has to move this along. You've seen a university move swiftly. I think one of the problems at the NCAA level is it takes years to bring these matters to conclusion. And that can't happen here. In fact, it shouldn't happen in any circumstance. The phrase justice delayed is justice denied doesn't come from an NCAA setting, but it's true. And the fact that whether it's USC or Syracuse that had a case that took like 9 years to bring to the finish line. That can't happen. And I think the leadership in Knoxville has shown a willingness to move rapidly, to move thoroughly, and the NCAA has to move in that same way.
We're talking to SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey. As a part of open jobs that have existed at Auburn and Tennessee in particular, and South Carolina to a certain extent too, people like me who sit around and talk about who might get jobs, that's a part of the discussion in the world of sports. Hugh Freeze's name has come up several times. I know he had issues at Ole Miss. He's now at Liberty. Could he get a head coaching job in the SEC, or is he now not eligible to get that job? That's a question that fans have been debating a lot.
Well, I give Hugh credit for his work at Liberty, and it was fun to watch their bowl game, see him with his family at the end of the game with a smile on his face, and good for him and how he's turned the page. Our schools make their own hiring decisions. I think we've been clear that the conference membership established a rule that each school is responsible at a head coach position or an assistant coach position to fully evaluate the background of individuals. They do that through our office. We share information that's publicly available, and then they make decisions. So they're all going to make those decisions, but they have to proceed carefully, and particularly when there's an issue of concern like has arisen this week, extra caution has to be exercised.
But there's no ban in particular. Everybody has to go through the process, but the SEC hasn't put out, because that's one of the topics of conversation is people say, oh, Greg Sankey has let it be known that Hugh Freeze can't be a head coach in the SEC. There's not that prohibition out there.
Well, I won't speak to any individual. I get blamed for a lot you may see on social media, so I'll take the blame. We expect our universities, and they expect each other to be responsible in their personnel decisions, and they have that responsibility, but ultimately our campuses make those decisions.
Let's go to football coming back. When you look towards 2021, are we talking about, in your mind, hopefully full stadiums again come September kickoff in the SEC? What does spring practice, what does spring games look like? You're obviously dealing with a lot of different sports right now, but what does 2021 for college football look like from your perspective?
One of the missed narratives in this is we were going to announce the 2021 schedule last April, so that was produced. And when we stopped in March, we actually had to think about, hey, do we make this announcement for 2021? And obviously it didn't happen. And so we're just reconfirming dates right now. My view is we need to put out our 2021 schedule as it's been planned, our traditional format with non-conference games. I think we saw the importance of non-conference games in postseason decision-making this year. So it'll be nice to see those again. I'd like to do that sooner rather than later, Clay. I think somebody on my Twitter account is trying to make wedding plans, and so that's an additional pressure point.
Well, no, look, I was gonna read that. I was going to read that to you here. I said that I would ask. A direct question from the anonymous mailbag, which I know you have swung through sometimes. My brother and his fiance are planning to get married sometime this year. He and I are diehard Florida fans, and she says they want to have the wedding in New Orleans on Friday, and then the Florida LSU game the next day on Saturday. Right now, they have it scheduled for the weekend of October 16th. She wrote in and said, can you ask SEC Commissioner Greg Sankey when that game will be played and if we're looking good for New Orleans? So there's already a lot of people out there ready for weddings and games. So when's the schedule going to be out?
There's actually the one I was referring to is separate from that. I didn't know about that one. So
that was this week. That was Tuesday. That went up yesterday.
Yeah.
So I said I was going to ask her for you.
It just means more, man. That's the slogan right there. Tell them that if they can just hold on for a few more weeks. I actually don't know the date, so I couldn't give it away if I wanted to, which I wouldn't. But I think we'll get to a conclusion. And then if you back up, we've practiced. We've gone through preseason practice, bowl practice, in-season practice. So you look at spring practice as being able to happen. I've not had in my mind now that we'd be in disruption of that activity. And so you can go back into preparation at this point. Now, if something changes around the pandemic, What I've said is I'd like to announce our schedule, and then we'll go back to the mantra I had all last summer, which is we're going to prepare to play the season as scheduled, but the circumstances around the virus will dictate our way forward. And we'll get back to that kind of normal thought, and then back to that communication point with the idea that if we can continue along a healthy path in the country, we could get back to something close to what we're accustomed to.
Good stuff as always. Appreciate you coming on. Congratulations on finishing the season, and we look forward to next season, but certainly the NCAA tournament and more as well. Thanks.